9 to 10,000 years ago, some of the first ancestors of the now living Native Americans established themselves in Utah. Through the centuries, large climate fluctuations led to a change of the landscape from primarily forests and lakes to the deserts we see today. Over time, human adaptation permitted the development of tools, baskets, and arrow points that would aid archaeologists in classifying the peoples and ages they inhabited. Between 200 CE and 1300 CE, portions of the Paleo and Archaic peoples had given rise to the ancient civilizations of the Anasazi and Fremont peoples. Their vast societies stretched across much of Utah, portions of Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, but would eventually crumble under the stress of droughts lasting decades. Around 1200 to 1500 CE, a new group of people came to the area speaking Numic, also known as Shoshonean. Nomadic and adaptable, they were able to outcompete their neighbors for the dwindling resources. It is from this group of people that the historic Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute are descended. At the latter end of this period, around 1400 CE, another group of people speaking Athabascan from the western reaches of Canada found a new home in the southwest. From these hunters and gatherers, the historic tribes of the Apache and Navajo would rise.
They inhabited the Great Basin for hundreds of years, including over into the Wind River Valley and southwest Wyoming. They became divided with time and as they encountered white people in two different groups. One group, the Northwest Shoshone, is the tribe that lived predominantly in Utah, up in the Cache Valley, near Promontory Point in the Promontory Mountains, and near present-day Brigham City. They also lived north from there up into the Malad, Idaho area. The Northwest Shoshone had a different history. Most of them did not go to Fort Hall, but continued to roam in northern and northwest Utah, even after the Mormon pioneers settled. With pressure from the Mormon pioneers and the loss of some of their best land for subsistence, land taken by farmers and used with irrigation, the Western Shoshone were forced into poverty and had increasingly difficult lives. West Shoshone came under pressure more from non-Mormons than from Mormons. The Mormons had a policy of feed, don't fight, and Mormon leaders worked with the Shoshone to provide rations and supplies, and they endeavored to teach the Shoshone how to settle down and to farm. At the same time as this was beginning, a community rising from the Transcontinental Railroad called Corinne, Utah, grew up. It was a vehemently anti-Indian, anti-Mormon community, and it had a newspaper that espoused extermination of the Shoshone. The Idaho Statesman also had similar views. It took many years for them to be recognized as a distinct tribe, but I believe it was in the late 1980s, they were recognized and their lands are set aside. There are two tribal headquarters. One is in Brigham City and one is in Pocatello. Are also notable because they were the targets of the worst Indian massacre in American history, the Bear River Massacre, which used to be called the Battle of Bear River. A U.S. cavalry troop from California with volunteers under Colonel Connor marched north from Fort Douglas up to just north of the Idaho border along the Bear River where the Shoshone were camped. And the Shoshone were not expecting a battle. They were expecting some kind of negotiation. But the soldiers began firing and in a matter of a couple hours killed about 300 or more Shoshone, including women and children. After the Bear River Massacre, the agent for the tribes in Utah negotiated a treaty with the Shoshone. It's the Treaty of Box Elder. And that treaty provided that the government would give provisions and set aside land for them. It wasn't fully implemented. There was another treaty with the Washakie Wind River Shoshones. They got a reservation much earlier than did the Northwest Shoshone or the Fort Hall Shoshone Bannock. But there was a treaty, and that treaty is, I believe, still in effect today.
From the vast deserts and forested peaks of the Basin and Range country, stretching west from the Wasatch Mountains, the Goshutes scraped their living from some of the most inhospitable lands in North America. Minimum subsistence living without economic surplus was the norm for the Goshutes, which inhibited further development and expansion of their society beyond their borders. They lived in small family units and occasionally gathered together to form larger villages and bands during the winter months. The relative isolation saved them from much interaction with Europeans until the Mormons arrived in 1847. Over the ensuing decades, settlements arose along the lines of established cross-country trails, like the Pony Express. White settlements with grazing livestock competed with the Goshutes for scarce resources. In futile attempts to save their way of life, Goshute groups killed livestock and attacked small settlements. The U.S. Army was brought in, resulting in the deaths of many, and forced a treaty with the Goshutes in the 1860s. Initially, the U.S. government tried to relocate the tribal members to the Uinta Basin to live alongside the Utes. With aid from several local Mormon settlers, they were able to stay on the lands of their forefathers, though they were much reduced in size. Today, the two federally recognized Goshute tribes have about 600 members total. The larger reservation is the Confederated Tribes of the Goshute Reservation, on the Utah-Nevada border south of Wendover. The Skull Valley Band of Goshutes is 70 miles southwest of Salt Lake City, on the west side of the Stansbury Mountains. The Ute peoples walked the lands from southern Wyoming to northern New Mexico, from the edge of the Great Basin to the heart of the Colorado Rockies. There were many bands ranging between 20 to 100 members, including the Uinta, White River, Uncompahgre, and Weminuche Utes. They lived in a mix of wickiups and teepees depending on the region and the season. The Utes acquired the horse from the Spanish around 1680 and became highly mobile, adopting some of the plains' cultural practices. They continued trade with the Spanish and remained independent until the full force of European settlement followed Mormons in 1847. Within 6 years, due to the spreading of Mormon settlements, resources for the Utes dwindled. Facing starvation, the Utes began raids on white settlements in the Walker War between 1853 and 1857. Attempts at Indian farms in Utah Valley failed along with the crops. The Uinta Reservation was created by President Lincoln in 1961, but the Utes resisted and restarted the raids called the Black Hawk War. Weakened by the fighting and lack of food, the Utes acquiesced and settled on the barren Uinta Reservation. The struggles were amplified as other bands of Utes, including the Uncompahgre and White River Utes, were forced onto the resource-scarce lands of the Uinta-Ouray Reservation. Further reduction of reservation size resulted from government-created allotments of land that opened Indian land to non-native settlement. Around 1930, the Ute bands formed a business council and joined together to establish themselves as the Northern Ute. Federal recognition was gained over several decades of court battles. Unfortunately, the Indian Termination Act of 1954 forced the expulsion of all natives with less than 1/2 blood quantum, as federal aid was cut. However, over the subsequent decades, their political power grew, partly due to oil and natural gas found on their lands. Today, there are approximately 3,500 tribal members, half of which live on the reservation.